Hi, I'm Dr. David Ermer. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm currently the Clinical Vice President of Behavioral Health Services at Avera, and I'm excited to be here today discussing child development. Child development is a broad topic. We could spend a week discussing child development. What I'd like to do today is go over preschool development through early adolescence, and then a different topic will be early adolescence through adulthood. There's lots of things that happen during early child development. The growth of the brain and skills from birth to 3 is especially dramatic, and then from 3 years old to 12 years old is also very dramatic. We're going to hit the high points. I'll try to hit the what I consider some of the bigger developmental issues along the way, and have time to also discuss things that may be of concern developmentally that may be worth investigating further. Before I get started on actual child development, I'd like to discuss a couple broad theories about child development to help understand how we in the medical community view child development. A big debate historically has been nature versus nurture. And when we talk about nature, we're talking about biology, what you're born with, your genetic predispositions, things that are basically outside your control. When we talk about nurture, we're talking about the environment that you grew up in. This could even start in utero. In other words, what you're exposed to in utero, all the way to your neighborhood, your family constellation, traumatic experiences. So nurture is more the things around you, whereas nature is what you're born with. When we discuss nature versus nurture, this has been debated for centuries. We realize today that both are important, and the interaction between the two is vital. Nature affects your environment, and your environment affects your biology. And so you can't look at one without the other. So when you look at child development, you're truly viewing the interaction between nature and nurture. You can't separate the two out. And I think it's very accurate to consider both and how they interact, because there's never an either or when discussing child development. When we talk about nature, again, I mentioned genetics. Genetics influences a wide variety of characteristics, anywhere from your body type. But as far as developmental things, we look, especially genetics influence temperament and intelligence. Temperamental and characteristics that you can inherit from your family include things like reactivity, how you respond to things in your environment, your mood. Are you generally an upbeat person, or do you run a little bit melancholy? These things can actually be temperamental, short of being actually a diagnostic. Shyness can be inherited. Emotionality can be inherited. How sort of mini mood swings. Attention and persistence to task within normal limits can be inherited. Some people can spend hours involved in one activity, whereas other people can't spend that length of time, and both are within the normal range. Adaptability with heritability estimates, and adaptability is also how well you adapt to changes in your environment, can also be inherited. We know, again, you probably know people who do really well when there's multiple changes, and people who struggle with very small changes in their environment. Heritability estimates for temperament are anywhere from 0.2 to 0.6, which means that with 1 being, we think it's very heritable, is that almost entirely genetically inherited. And I do want to discuss heritability because it's a confusing topic, and frankly, most people misunderstand it. We do know that intelligence has a heritability of around 0.5%, which means about half of maybe your predisposition is inherited as far as intelligence. But that also means for both these characteristics that your environment's very important. And just to clarify heritability, it's an incredibly misunderstood topic. Heritability means it's used to explain the variance of characteristics across a population with a common environment. In other words, it explains the differences in temperament and intelligence within a population. It doesn't tell us that even if something has a heritability of 1, it doesn't mean that environment's not important. It just tells you how much variability there is. Environment can be very important to all these things. We know that environment's hugely important to intelligence. Even if you inherited high intelligence, if you grow up in an impoverished environment, it's highly likely that you're going to have a lower IQ than you would otherwise if you were in a very enriched, nurturing environment. A classic example of something that's highly heritable, that's also very environmentally sensitive, is height. We know 200 years ago, the average human height was much shorter than it is today. But we also know that your height is determined by how tall your parents are. If you have short parents, typically you're going to be shorter. If you have tall parents, you're going to be taller. But we know that because of better nutrition, better immunizations, better sanitation of water, we know that people are healthier, and so their height has gotten consistently higher over the last 300 years. If anyone's ever visited Europe in some of the houses that were built 500 years ago, most people find themselves ducking their head and wondering how they could survive in a house like that because the average height was much shorter. So what it shows us is that even though height is incredibly heritable, it also has a huge environment has a huge impact on your average height. So I don't want you to feel, I think the confusion is that just because something's highly heritable, that environment makes no difference whatsoever, because environment can be huge, and we see that in child development. Nurture can be anything in your world: parenting style, number of siblings you have, socioeconomic status, neighborhood characteristics, cultural characteristics, what culture you grew up in. I found a very interesting characteristic from colonial times. They actually felt that infants shouldn't crawl during colonial times, so they recommended that parents even bind infants' legs if they try to crawl, because they felt like it would interfere with walking. Today we know that that's not true, that truly crawling is a gateway to walking, but back then it was considered adverse to crawl as an infant. Again, that's a cultural characteristic. And then even though trauma or adverse events is last on this list, it's a big topic in my world. We know that kids who have had traumatic life experiences can have a dramatic impact on all areas of development: physical well-being, intelligence, emotional well-being, success as an adult are all impacted by adverse childhood events, which include things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, neglect. We know that when we do studies, unfortunately, 22% of kids have had one adverse childhood event in their life. Around 28% have been physically abused, 1 in 5 children sexually abused. And we're hoping that these are modifiable events. If we can help kids avoid trauma, we can make great gains in helping kids be more well-adjusted as they get older. We do know that some rankings have kids as much as 32 times more likely to have a learning or behavior problem, suicide attempts, or drug use if they've had adverse child events. On the other hand, conversely, a lot of parents worry that they've done something adverse once, or they did something wrong as a parent. There's also the concept of good enough parenting. If you're helping shield your kids from traumatic experiences and you make some mistakes as adults, the kids are going to do just fine. So I don't want parents to worry that just because maybe they lost their temper and yelled at their child, that they've traumatized their kid for life. The concept of good enough parenting is if for the most part, you presented a good home environment, your kids are going to do great, even despite mistakes, because every parent's made mistakes. A couple more concepts: developmental timing and plasticity. Basically, developmental timing is a concept that, everyone wants to compare their kids' development to other kids, but we know that kids develop at different levels within normal range. And so even if your child's a little bit later to talk than the neighbor kid, that doesn't mean that they might not even catch up or even surpass the other children as far as language skills. Everyone develops at variable rates. So unless it's outside the range of normal development where we may have to intervene, we see this variability. And we also see that children, for instance, may be really advanced with motor skills, but less advanced with language, and vice versa. And the one lags behind and they end up catching up later. And these are all a fairly normal part of child development. And so parents shouldn't be too concerned. But that's why it's also real important that we have kids go to well child visits so they can assess their development compared to other kids their age. Plasticity is another term, which means that traits can be altered throughout the lifespan, but are typically more malleable early in development. In other words, a good example is a child could have a brain injury, but because they haven't developed all their brain is much more malleable, they can really have very minimal impact on their functioning compared to an adult who doesn't have that level of plasticity, and we see that a lot. Kids have 50% more neural connections than adults, and through learning and other pathways, these connections are pared down and either pared down or strengthened based on learning and development. And kids, when they're infants, are like a blank slate, so to speak, and they can take in their environment and learn from that. And so they have much more plasticity. One neuroscientist was quoted as saying that principal activity in the brain is making changes to itself. In other words, it's learning what's around it and what it needs to do as the brain. And then finally, as far as broad topics go, I just want to discuss critical and sensitive periods. There's a little bit of overlap between the two, but there's certainly critical periods in child development that are time limited, that if you don't develop that skill during that period of time, you're highly unlikely to develop that skill or develop that functioning. A good example is if you had, we've learned historically that babies that are born with congenital cataracts and don't have vision, if you don't correct that early in life, they will never have vision. And then we also know that if kids aren't exposed to language or are hearing impaired and don't develop language in the first 5 years of life, they typically won't develop language. And critical period, so is this really abrupt time limited period where having those skills is critical. Sensitive periods is a little bit sort of softer than that. Basically, it's easier during sensitive periods of time. And great examples of this are learning a second language. If you're exposed to a second language before age 6, it is so much easier for you to learn and develop that language than an adult. However, as an adult, you can still learn and become proficient at a foreign language. It's just a lot easier during these sensitive periods. Music exposure is another good example where early exposure to music and even learning an instrument can really be helpful for acquisition of music skills later in life. Doesn't mean adults or older people can't learn the skills. It just means it's harder. So that's the kind of the difference between critical and sensitive periods. And so the next part of the presentation is just going to be going over some of the skills that we see preschool wise and then grade school. As far as social skills in preschool, we start to see kids becoming more cooperative, imaginative, and having fantasy play. They're taking turns in games versus when they were younger, where they do what we call parallel play, where they play side by side with other kids, but don't really do that interactive play quite as much. They continue to develop gross and fine motor skills. They can social skills. They experiment pretending with social roles, pretending they're a teacher or mom and dad, and their fears start to decrease. As far as behavior, they really want to please adults. If they're developing, typically they want to do what adults want them to do, and so that's their main goal. They start developing a conscience. Again, they're incorporating their parental ideas of what good or bad. So their view of what is right or wrong is what their parents think is right or wrong. They have no sense of privacy. So anybody who's had a preschool child has lived this, where they just barge into the bathroom or something and don't understand that people have private time. And then they have kind of a primitive understanding of gender roles. Cognitively, they're very egocentric, and what that means is it's all about them. They don't take other people's point of view. They may be illogical. They may have magical thinking. A good example of magical thinking would be if they were thinking mean thoughts about their sibling and their sibling fell down and hurt themselves, they might feel guilty because their bad thoughts caused their sibling to get hurt. And they may have magical thinking about other events that they think they may be responsible for. So they may have a lot of questions about that. Their vocabulary explodes during preschool. They have very poor understanding of time, sequence of events. They might talk about things happening yesterday that were a year ago. So they're not real reliable or reporters of events. when we do, frankly, interviews with kids 3 to 5, we'll ask them, maybe were you feeling this way at your birthday, at Christmas, because they have a better understanding of major events in their life. They have vivid imaginations, and sometimes they have difficulty separating fantasy from reality. And we do have parents concerned because their kids have a lot of these magical beliefs, and they're reassured that this is entirely normal at this age. They have a very accurate memory, but you can convince them that things happened that didn't, so they're very suggestible. They have primitive drawings. They don't have other people's point of view. They leave out very important facts, and they may misinterpret emotions. And the receptive language is better than expressive. In other words, they understand what you're saying much better than they can express themselves, which can actually lead to frustration, where they can be very frustrated because they're trying to explain something to you and they have difficulty explaining it, but they can understand what you're saying quite well. Emotionally, self-esteem is based on what others tell him or her, which means that you really do want to set them up for positive environments. If they constantly hear that they're no good or they're terrible at things, they're going to start developing, their self-esteem is based on what the people they care about tell him or her. They have better frustration tolerance. We all know that when they're 2 years of age, they throw fits, get upset quite easily. That's a very normal development. But starting in preschool, they should start showing better control of their frustrations. They can delay gratification a little bit longer at this age. They still struggle with delayed gratification. They want something now. Again, their sense of self is just basic. They understand right and wrong. Again, self-esteem is based on what others say. They can be curious. And at this age, they can start doing self-directed activities. They can entertain themselves, for lack of a better word, at this age, if they're developing normally. Physically, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Again, going through those well child checks, they'll look at the physical development. They're very physically active. I would argue that if a 3 to 5 year old had the activity, if a 12 to 14 year old had the activity of a 3 to 5 year old, we all think they had ADHD, and they'd probably meet the criteria because they're very active. They can't sit still for very long. Boys tend to be a little bit more active than girls. A rule of 3, at 3 years, they should be 3 feet tall, 33 pounds. It's a very rough estimate. And as I said earlier, this is entirely variable. Again, a pediatrician will check on these things. Physically active, again, they can't sit still for long. They can be quite clumsy at times. They can ride a tricycle. They're improving their fine motor skills. They should be able to use scissors, and they should be toilet trained by 3.5 years of age, 4 years of age. Boys tend to be later than girls. Developmental concerns, I'm going to break it down. There's so much difference even between an age 4 and a 5 year old. I'm going to break it down to between a 4 and a 5 year old. If concerning behaviors in a 4 year old would be ignoring other people or doesn't respond to people outside the family, speaks unclearly, doesn't use the correct pronouns. And these are things that you start worrying about, either language development or even children with autism sometimes just don't have the social skills. And then if they don't correctly use the pronouns, that can also be somewhat problematic. It certainly doesn't mean they have autism. There's lots of reasons. In fact, the number one reason for language delays is hearing problems, not autism. Can't retell a favorite story. Anytime, a common theme throughout development, if you lose skills, that's always a concern, and that's a reason to see your primary care doctor, because we shouldn't be losing skills. Sometimes kids will temporarily regress if they're sick or they're stressors, but they shouldn't be losing skills. A 4-year-old should be able to follow 3-part commands. If they show no interest in interactive games or make-believe, again, we're worried about their social skills and things like autism. And then for the gross motor skills, things like jumping and split place and scribbling, they should be able to do. Age 5, it's fairly similar, but they should be able to say their first and last name. They lose skills, again, as a concern. Can't draw a picture. Easily distracted, trouble focusing on one activity for more than 5 minutes. Again, we start, as a child psychiatrist, we start seeing kids referred to our clinic when they're having trouble paying attention or sitting still, and we're looking for things like ADHD. We tend to wait till they're 6 or 7 years of age because kids are just more active at age 5. But if it's fairly consistent that it's interfering with social life, academic activities is something to consider even as young as age 5, especially if there's a family history of ADHD. If they don't play a variety of games or activities or stuck on one activity, you're concerned. If they, as I mentioned earlier, preschoolers get make-believe and real mixed up. Age 5, they should be able to tell the difference. Again, some of the skills they should have is brushing teeth or dressing themselves. Or if they're extremely aggressive, especially compared to their peers, it's a concerning behavior. School age, so that's preschool. School aged, it's kind of a continuation of preschool. They should be continuing developing their communication skills. And the wonderful thing about cognitive development school age is that the kids are going to be in school, so teachers and others are going to see if they have concerns. They're going to share that with the parents, obviously, because they're going to be challenging their cognitive skills on a daily basis. Perspective taking, again, they're getting better at perspective taking, but they still can't recognize other people's perspectives and can't assume the role of others at age 5 to 8. At age 8 to 10, they can recognize the difference between a behavior and intent. What that means is at 8 to 10, they can tell if a kid bumps into them in the cafeteria and it was an accident and they spill their tray, they understand that the other child wasn't intending to do that, and they understand they're not going to get angry, whereas before that, they might think it was an act of aggression. And then at 10 to 11 years of age, they can accurately recognize somebody else's point of view. Concrete operations are just a cognitive development, where a great example is if you have a tall, thin cylinder and a really wide one, and you pour the same amount of water in each one, despite the fact that the levels are going to be quite different. Kids at this age can tell the difference and know it's the same amount of water. Before that age, they would think there's more in one than the others. They can remember events from months or years earlier at this age. They have much more effective coping skills, and they understand how behavior affects others. School age, as far as social skills, friendships are situation specific. What this means is they may have friends that are soccer friends, neighborhood friends, and school friends, and sometimes they don't understand that you can have a friendship that goes through all areas. They understand right and wrong. They also, as far as rules go, rules guide their behavior starting at school age. 5 to 6-year-olds believe that rules can be changed. And so sometimes we'll have parents really concerned because their child is cheating at a game, but that's a fairly common and normal developmental event at that age, is to cheat during games. 7 to 8-year-olds are really rule bound. And then at 9 to 10-year-olds, you start to realize the rules can be negotiated a little bit. They begin to understand social roles. They see them as somewhat inflexible, take on more responsibility and chores at home. They have less fantasy, playing more board games and team sports. And their moral point of view is, okay, I got to stay out of trouble. So it's a self-interest. Like my morality is, I got to behave in such a way that I stay out of trouble. Emotional self-esteem is ability based on performance and production. So again, it's important to make sure that kids have positive experiences where they can be successful, because that does affect their self-esteem. They learn different ways to deal with frustration. They're very sensitive to others' opinions about themselves. Physically, again, they continue to grow. And then at 10 to 12 years of age, especially in girls, we're starting to see puberty set in. As far as developmental concerns from a 6 to 12-year-old point of view, again, anytime you have loss of skills, I've mentioned that every single time, it's a broken record. If you're losing skills, it's concerning. If they're sad or nervous much of the time, you do worry about, you can start seeing anxiety and depression, and it may be worth if the anxiety gets to the point where they're not wanting to go to school, or they have a stomach ache every morning, or it impacts their ability to want to try activities, then it's worth getting assessment and intervention. If they don't turn to adults for help or comfort, or excessively turn to adults for attention, then either of those could be concerning. If they have very little frustration tolerance, very rigid about rules, social isolation, or if their activity level is much higher than other children their age. And these are all concerning issues. Basically, if you see emotional or behavior issues that make them stand out amongst their peers, then that could be a concern. And you can see that both at home, school, or even in other settings such as sports. That is the end of a fairly quick run through of child development. It's very much more complicated than this, but I try to hit the high points. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions or concerns about child development, I gave the Avera behavioral health number at the bottom of the screen. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Avera Family Forum with the Sioux Falls School District. As you just listened to Dr. Irmer talk about child development and some of the concerns maybe possibly with environment, and also talking about that development, what's normal and sometimes what's not normal with a child, we're going to take a little bit different twist today. And in the second part, we're going to have more of a conversation about what that may look like in the Sioux Falls School District when we're working with children and when we're working with you as the parent, and some information that maybe will be helpful to you. So I have two of the best with me right now that we are going to have this conversation with. And Molly, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
My name is Molly Rost, and I have taught in the Sioux Falls School District for 30 years. And I've taught 25 of those in kindergarten. And I'm just happy to be here to share my information with you.
All right, thank you. And Alyssa.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Pratch-Huseman. I am a school counselor at Eugene Field Elementary, and I'm here to share some information as well.
All right. And I'm Patty Lake Torbert. I'm in charge of the Student Support Services and Office of Indian Education in the Sioux Falls School District. So, Molly, I think we're going to start with you because we like starting with those early young ages. And so one of the things that you and I had talked about before are that we get kind of those common concerns that come up every single year. And would you mind sharing those concerns that parents, when students are first starting in kindergarten, that you hear quite a bit on?
Absolutely. The very first question we always get is my child ready? How do I know if they're ready? Should I send them? And we always just start discussing things like their stamina and how they feel about sitting and working for a few minutes on a puzzle or a book. We always start out with kids at the very beginning level of stamina, and we build it from there. So you don't have to worry that your child can do a whole day worth of school, but can they do an activity for a little while? Another concern parents have is they want their child to have lots of friends. So right away we talk to them about you automatically have a school family when you come to kindergarten, and great ways to make friends are just helping your child to build some of that sportsmanship, taking turns, listening to others, not having to always be first, and those are some great things that they can do as well. Another thing that we notice parents will ask about is regulation and kind of what behaviors are you expecting from my child? And we're really hoping that your child can deal with frustration or deal with something that's new, because when they come to kindergarten, they're going to encounter lots of new experiences, and they're going to be asked to do things that they're not used to doing. So parents will say, what do I need to look for with that? And we'll just say, give them opportunities to do some things that aren't preferred, and help them to work through those feelings of doing something a little bit different. Helps them out a lot.
So I think you hit on some of those already, but if you could talk to that parent when they're first starting school with their child, what are some suggestions that you would give? Are there any further ones that you'd give? Yeah.
Well, first of all, start making a routine. Having a routine is really important to kindergartners, and they're going to be very exhausted when they come to school. There's just a lot of thinking that goes on, and that takes a lot of energy. So having a great bedtime routine, having healthy meals planned, thinking about what your child's going to do for lunch. We offer wonderful school lunches, so looking at the menu and talking to your child about what they're going to be having, so that you know that they're choosing some good healthy things at school or with their snack lunch. Bedtime is important, and that food is important. Talking to them just about bathroom routines, an odd one. Lots of children come to school and they're not sure how to shut the door when they're going to use the bathroom or turn the light on. Just some of those kinds of things. Self-help with being able to put on a jacket, those types of things will make your child feel a lot more comfortable. Helping your child feel confident is a huge benefit for your child. And by being independent and learning how to do some of those things to just be able to take care of yourself in a classroom of many children, it really makes your child feel a lot more comfortable coming to school.
And do they have the opportunity as a parent to talk to you about some of those concerns that they might have even before school starts?
Absolutely. We have kindergarten registration.
Right.
And then every school has some sort of open house, or we have like a meet and greet with families where they come in individually and meet with me, and we can talk about their personal concerns and any special things with their child that they're wondering about.
I have a feeling we're going to keep coming back to that communication, how important that is.
Absolutely.
And so Alyssa, we've been talking about kindergarten and kind of those younger grades. What about looking at the concerns that parents might have and that have come to you or to teachers that you know in those grades more like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? Does it look different?
I think a big trend that I'm seeing right now is the social conflicts that come with aging through elementary school, as well as technology and social media being a big thing that kids younger and younger are taking part in, and they're spending more time on it. And they're also connecting socially through those platforms as well. And sometimes that can be a positive thing, but also there comes some conflicts with those, where they're interacting with each other and they don't have as much supervision, and possibly having some conflicts outside of school that carry into the school day that cause some anxiety with having to navigate those challenges.
I'm glad that you mentioned anxiety because, as we know, we've talked a lot in the Sioux Falls School District and just probably generally in the population about anxiety and how, especially the last few years, we've seen more of that. Maybe it was always there, but it just seems like we're seeing more of that and seeing that more at a younger age. What does that look like, kind of developmentally? What does that look like in an elementary age student?
I've seen a lot of task avoidance, maybe just anxiety surrounding the academics, maybe not feeling as confident with their academics. Some shutdown behavior to where they're unable to communicate that school is hard for them or that navigating social challenges are more difficult for them. And that can also look like complaining of ailments, stomach aches, headaches. And it is common for kids to have anxiety and it not disrupt their whole day. So they can, once in a while complain of a headache or a stomach ache, or maybe once in a while avoid a task. But when it becomes chronic and they're not wanting to come to school on a regular basis, or they're not wanting to participate in enjoyable activities like recess or a fun activity in the classroom, that's when it becomes a bigger concern for me.
Yeah. I remember years ago we talked about almost like there is that positive stress versus that almost distress and the difference between the two, and you kind of mentioned that with anxiety.
Yep.
That some anxiety gets you moving, gets you going, and it's normal, but when it gets to be too much, it's just not normal.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
I think we're noticing too a lot of that coming into kindergarten at the beginning of the year and working through that. Kind of what I was saying with children that haven't been frustrated before or haven't had to do a non-preferred task before, haven't had to work through just those feelings of being a little bit uncomfortable when you're not positive about what you're doing. So when you come to school, there's going to be new things in every grade level that you have to do. And just kind of having worked through that in earlier experiences really helps you approach it with something new. So when families can provide just those moments where they might have to wait or might have to be frustrated for a minute or might have to work through, work out zipping their coat or work out, putting on their shoe, that kind of builds their understanding of knowing, like, I don't have to get upset, I can work through this.
I think that's important because I think we're always trying to find that balancing act between how much do we help our children, how much do we let them go through some of those frustrations. And I think what I'm hearing you both say is that that is normal. It's okay for them to be a little bit frustrated because that's where they work out how to do something and gain that confidence, really. I remember always telling parents, I think when our children go through tough times and we're there to help and support them, that is where they start to build that confidence that they can do it. And they're not on their own. And certainly they're not on their own in the district.
Absolutely.
So communication, I'm going to come back around to that. If a parent would want to work with the Sioux Falls School District or really any school district, this is going out to quite a few people around the state, how would that communication work?
I think the best place to start is with the classroom teacher and addressing either via phone call, email, or in person your concerns. Teachers see a lot of kiddos at a lot of different levels, so we can tell you if their concern is in a normal range, if it's something common that we're seeing. Sometimes we can alleviate that stress right away by saying, oh, everybody is doing that now, or that's a very common thing for everyone. From there, we always are reaching out to our school counselors, to our administration, to all the services that we have available to help the family get connected to whatever support they might need. So by starting with that classroom teacher, we're very eager to connect families. We want to be a great resource for every family.
And so if a parent would reach out to a teacher and the teacher says, yeah, I think there are some concerns here and I think there might be some options, what might be some of those options that a school could help a parent with a student that they're concerned with?
We set a meeting with the kiddo and we just kind of ask some questions and try to take a curious approach. And we take the information from the teacher and we, investigate. And then I think, starting with talking with the parents and what they see at home as well, thinking about what we could do with skill building in small groups. If there is some anxiety with some task avoidance or friendship conflicts, we could do some planned breaks or some skill building outside of the classroom during like a recess or lunch period to where they can connect with those peers and work out those challenges and do some practice that way. And then if we see that there's challenges that go beyond the school, we always are connected with resources in the community, and we always make sure that we provide families with those.
And my understanding is with quite a few different options.
Yep.
So that a parent never feels like there's just this one
Yep.
type of referral, but other options.
Yep.
All right, sounds very good.
And as far as academics, we have wonderful speech people. We have occupational therapists and physical therapists and special ed teachers that will often come in and give us advice even before anything official happens. But we can get information from others that might help us to solve some problems in the classroom or just some advice for the families as well.
Which I think is important to know, because I think sometimes if I'm a parent and I'm calling up and being concerned about my child, I always think, oh my gosh, are they going to jump too far with the kind of help and assistance? But you're saying this really is, there are steps to this.
Yes.
And I appreciated when you said investigate, really trying to investigate, working with the parent and the child and the teacher and what's happening. And of course, we never want to leave out our administrators, because they're also a great resource, and want to make sure that our families are welcome to call them at any time. Is there anything that we missed out on that you would like to share? I think we hit on some good topics here, so yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us. This is the Avera Family Forum with the Sioux Falls School District, and we look forward to having you tune in next time when we will actually be covering the same topic, but with middle school and high school age children. Thank you.